My name is Rebecca, and I thought I had everything figured out. 10 years of marriage, a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 kids who were my entire world. Every morning, I'd wake up at 6, make breakfast for the family, pack lunches, and wave goodbye to my husband Daniel as he drove off to work. My life was predictable, comfortable, safe. I'd built my entire existence around being the perfect wife, the perfect mother. I volunteered at the school, hosted dinner parties, kept our home spotless. But beneath that glossy surface, something was rotting, and I was too busy playing my role to notice the cracks spreading through the foundation of my marriage. It started with small things I told myself didn't matter. Daniel coming home later and later, always with reasonable excuses about meetings and deadlines. The way he'd angle his phone away when texting. How he suddenly became interested in updating his wardrobe, wearing cologne I'd never bought him. My friends noticed before I did. At a coffee meetup, my best friend Jessica mentioned it casually. Jessica said, Daniel's been looking really sharp lately. New gym routine? I just smiled and nodded, but her words planted a seed of doubt that started growing in the dark corners of my mind. Still, I pushed it away. We'd been together since college. We had history, children, a mortgage. People don't just throw that away, right? So I doubled down on denial, convinced myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. The real wake-up call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd finished my shift at the community center early and decided to surprise Daniel with lunch at his office. I stopped by his favorite deli, got his usual sandwich, and drove across town feeling like maybe this spontaneous gesture would bring back some of the spark we'd lost. When I walked into the reception area of his building, I saw him immediately. He was standing by the elevators, and he wasn't alone. She was younger than me, probably late 20s. Long auburn hair that caught the light perfectly, a fitted dress that showed off a figure I could never achieve after 2 pregnancies. But what made my stomach drop wasn't her appearance. It was the way Daniel looked at her. The same way he used to look at me 15 years ago. His hand was on the small of her back, lingering there with an intimacy that couldn't be mistaken for anything professional. They were laughing, their heads close together, completely absorbed in each other. I stood there frozen, holding that stupid sandwich, watching my husband be someone I didn't recognize. I turned around and walked out before either of them saw me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the car. I drove home in a daze, pulled into our driveway, and just sat there for what felt like hours. The sandwich was still on the passenger seat, getting cold, and I remember thinking how fitting that was. Everything in my life had gone cold, and I'd been too blind to feel it happening. That night, Daniel came home at his usual late time. He kissed my cheek absently, asked what was for dinner, complained about traffic. I served him pot roast and listened to him talk about his day, every word another knife twisting in my chest. He mentioned a difficult client, a boring meeting, nothing about the woman whose back his hand had been caressing. I wanted to scream, to throw the dinner plates against the wall, to demand the truth. Instead, I smiled and asked if he wanted seconds. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I checked the credit card statements and found charges at restaurants we'd never been to together, expensive gifts I'd never received. I looked through his phone one night while he was in the shower and found messages that made me nauseous. Her name was Vanessa. She worked in marketing on the same floor as Daniel. The messages were full of inside jokes, plans to meet up, and intimate details that belonged to me, not to some stranger who'd waltzed into my marriage. One message in particular burned itself into my memory. Vanessa had written, "Can't wait for our weekend away. 2 more weeks feels like forever." Daniel had responded, "I know, babe. Already told Rebecca I have a conference in Chicago." I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, my hands steady despite the rage building inside me. There was no conference in Chicago. There was just my husband planning a romantic getaway with his mistress while I stayed home with our children, completely oblivious. The old me would have confronted him immediately, dissolved into tears, begged him to explain. But something had shifted. I wasn't that woman anymore. The betrayal had cracked something open inside me, and what poured out wasn't just hurt. It was fury. It was clarity. It was a determination to take back some control in a situation where I'd felt completely powerless. I spent the next few days gathering information. I learned that Vanessa lived in a trendy downtown apartment, drove a red convertible, and apparently went to the same upscale gym as Daniel. That explained his sudden interest in fitness. I learned her schedule, where she got her morning coffee, which parking spot she preferred at work. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this information yet, but knowing it made me feel less helpless. My sister called one evening while I was spiraling through these dark thoughts. Emma had always been the wild one in the family, the one who'd backpacked through Europe, changed careers 3 times, lived life on her own terms. We were close, but our lives had diverged so much over the years. She lived in Seattle, working as a freelance photographer, completely unburdened by the domestic responsibilities that defined my existence. Emma asked me how I was doing, and something in her voice made me break. I told her everything. The woman at the office, the messages, the fake conference, all of it. I expected sympathy, maybe some advice about couples therapy. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment, then said something I didn't expect. Emma said, "So what are you going to do about it?" I didn't know what she meant at first. Do about it? I was the wronged party here. What was I supposed to do? Emma continued, "Rebecca, I love you, but you've spent your entire adult life making yourself smaller to fit into this perfect wife role. And now you're discovering that it didn't even matter. He betrayed you anyway, so stop waiting for him to fix this or for the universe to hand you justice. What are you going to do?" Her words hung in the air. What was I going to do? I thought about confronting Daniel, about dignified divorces and splitting assets and custody arrangements. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wanted something else first. I wanted them to feel even a fraction of the humiliation I felt. I wanted some small victory before I blew up my entire life. That's when the idea started forming. It was petty, maybe even childish, but it felt right. I remembered seeing Vanessa at the office that day, her perfect hair, her confident stride. She was beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who clearly took pride in her appearance. And Daniel obviously appreciated that about her. So what if I took that away, just for a moment? What if I reminded them both that actions have consequences? I started researching. Turns out, permanent hair dye looks remarkably similar to regular shampoo when you transfer it to the right bottle. I spent an entire afternoon at beauty supply stores, learning about color theory and permanent versus semi-permanent formulas. The saleswoman must have thought I was planning to dye my own hair, because she kept trying to help me pick a shade that would complement my skin tone. I just smiled and told her I was surprising a friend. I chose purple. A vibrant, impossible-to-miss purple. The kind that would turn heads for all the wrong reasons in a conservative corporate office. The kind that would take weeks, maybe months, to fully wash out. I bought the strongest permanent dye I could find, the kind that comes with warnings about skin irritation and wearing gloves. Getting access to Vanessa's apartment was surprisingly easy. I waited until I knew she'd be at work, dressed like I belonged in her building, and slipped in behind another tenant. Her apartment number was on a package slip I'd seen photographed in one of Daniel's messages. Her door had a basic lock that yielded to a YouTube tutorial and a credit card. I know how that sounds. I know I was breaking the law, crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. But in that moment, standing in the hallway of her apartment building, I didn't care. Every moral compass I'd lived by had been shattered when I saw my husband's hand on her back. Her bathroom was exactly what I expected. Expensive skincare products lined up like soldiers, fluffy white towels, a shower big enough for 2 people. I found her shampoo easily, a fancy brand that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a week. I poured it down the drain and carefully refilled the bottle with the purple dye, making sure to mix it with just enough of her conditioner that it would have the same consistency. My hands were steady the entire time. I felt nothing but a cold, calculated satisfaction. I left everything exactly as I'd found it, locked her door behind me, and walked out of that building feeling more alive than I had in years. It was reckless and wrong, but it was mine. This choice, this action, it belonged to me in a way nothing had for a long time. 2 days later, Daniel came home early from work. He was agitated, pacing the kitchen while I chopped vegetables for dinner. He kept checking his phone, typing furiously, then sighing with frustration. I asked him what was wrong, playing the concerned wife perfectly. Daniel said nothing, just some drama at the office. I pressed a little the way a good wife should. What kind of drama? He hesitated, then said, one of the women in marketing had some kind of hair disaster. Came in with purple hair. Her words, not mine. Management sent her home until she fixes it. It's just causing problems with scheduling. I nodded sympathetically, chopping carrots with careful precision. That sounds frustrating. Poor woman. I hope she can fix it quickly. Inside, I was screaming with laughter. The image of Vanessa walking into that conservative office with bright purple hair, the stares, the whispers, the humiliation. It was everything I'd wanted. Daniel kept checking his phone throughout dinner, clearly texting her, trying to offer support. The irony wasn't lost on me. Over the next week, I watched Daniel struggle with the fallout. Vanessa apparently tried everything to remove the dye, but permanent is permanent. She ended up having to dye her entire head dark brown to cover it, and even then, hints of purple kept showing through. Daniel couldn't visit her as often because she was dealing with the hair crisis, going to different salons, spending money trying to fix it. Their texts became frustrated, stressed. The romance was definitely dampened when your mistress has a hair catastrophe that makes her self-conscious and keeps her hiding at home. But here's what I didn't expect. The revenge, as satisfying as it was in the moment, didn't actually make me feel better. I'd thought getting even would give me some kind of closure, some sense of justice. Instead, I just felt empty. I'd crossed a line, done something I'd never imagined myself capable of. And for what? Daniel was still cheating. My marriage was still broken. And now I was someone who broke into people's homes and sabotaged their belongings. I started having panic attacks. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, convinced the police were about to show up at my door. Every time my phone rang, I thought it was someone who'd figured out what I'd done. The guilt was crushing, but not for the reasons you might think. I didn't feel bad for Vanessa. I felt bad for myself, for becoming someone I didn't recognize, for letting Daniel's betrayal turn me into something ugly. The panic attacks got worse over the following days. I'd be in the middle of making dinner or helping Jake with his homework, and suddenly my chest would tighten, my breathing would become shallow, and the room would start spinning. I'd have to excuse myself, lock myself in the bathroom, and count to 10 over and over until the feeling passed. Maya noticed once, asking through the bathroom door if I was okay. I told her I just had an upset stomach, another lie added to the growing pile of deceptions that were becoming my new normal. I couldn't sleep. Every night, I'd lie in bed next to Daniel, who was completely oblivious to my turmoil, and replay what I'd done. I'd think about the moment I'd walked into Vanessa's apartment, touched her things, violated her space. I thought about how easily I'd crossed that line, how little hesitation I'd felt in that moment. It scared me. If I could do that, what else was I capable of? Who was I becoming? During the day, I went through the motions of my regular life like an actress playing a role. I dropped the kids at school, smiling and waving at the other parents. I volunteered in Maya's classroom, helping second graders with their reading assignments. I picked up Daniel's dry cleaning, grocery shopped, cooked meals, kept the house running smoothly. But inside, I was crumbling. Every mundane task felt heavy, weighted with the knowledge of what I'd done and what I'd discovered about my marriage. One afternoon, while waiting in the school pickup line, I found myself having a full conversation with another mom about the upcoming bake sale, nodding and agreeing to bring brownies, when I suddenly realized I had no memory of what we'd actually discussed. I was so disconnected from my own life that I was operating on autopilot, my body present while my mind spiraled through an endless loop of betrayal and revenge and consequences. Jessica called me one evening to check in. We'd been friends since our kids were toddlers, had shared countless play dates and coffee dates and gossip sessions. She knew me well enough to sense something was wrong. Jessica said she'd noticed I'd been distant lately, asked if everything was okay with Daniel. The irony of the question almost made me laugh. Instead, I told her I was just tired, stressed about some volunteer commitments. Another lie. I was becoming so good at lying. But Jessica persisted. She said, "Rebecca, I've known you for 7 years. Something is really wrong. You can talk to me." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to confess about Daniel and Vanessa and the purple dye and the panic attacks and the feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. But I couldn't, because telling her would make it all real in a way I wasn't ready to face. So I gave her a version of the truth, told her that Daniel and I were going through a rough patch, that I was feeling overwhelmed with everything. She offered support, sympathy, suggestions about marriage counseling. I thanked her and promised to call if I needed anything, knowing I probably wouldn't. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me. Sometimes I'd look over at him, this man I'd shared a bed with for a decade, and feel like I was looking at a stranger. How could he lie next to me every night, knowing what he was doing? How could he kiss me goodbye every morning, tell me he loved me, and then spend his day with another woman? The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I started imagining different scenarios. What if I confronted him right now, in the middle of the night, woke him up and demanded the truth? What if I packed a bag and left, just disappeared without explanation? What if I told Vanessa's boss about their affair, got them both fired? Each fantasy felt both satisfying and terrifying. I had all this power now, this knowledge, but I didn't know what to do with it. Daniel seemed lighter during this time, which made everything worse. He was humming in the shower, bringing home flowers randomly, being more affectionate with the kids. I realized with a sick feeling that the affair was probably making him happier. He was getting everything he wanted, the stability of home, the excitement of something new, no consequences, no hard choices. Meanwhile, I was drowning in secrets and lies and a revenge plot that had only made me feel worse about myself. About a week after the purple dye incident, I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I found a receipt in Daniel's pants pocket. It was from a jewelry store downtown, dated 2 days ago. My heart started racing. Was he buying gifts for Vanessa? I checked our credit card statement online and found the charge. $347 at a high-end jewelry boutique. The same amount of money we'd argued about spending on new tires for my car just last month because it wasn't in the budget. I sat there on our bedroom floor, surrounded by piles of clean clothes, holding this receipt, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was the financial betrayal. The way he was spending our family's money on his mistress while telling me we needed to be more careful with expenses. It was the complete disrespect, the utter disregard for our partnership, our family, everything we'd built together. That's when I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep going through the motions, playing the perfect wife while he played the perfect cheater. Something had to give. But I still wasn't ready to blow everything up. I needed a plan, needed to figure out what I wanted and how to protect myself and the kids, so I started preparing in small ways. I opened a separate bank account that Daniel didn't know about. Nothing dramatic, just a small savings account at a different bank. And I started depositing money from my part-time work at the community center. It wasn't much, maybe $50 or $100 at a time, but it was mine, my secret, my safety net, my way of taking back some control. I also started documenting everything. I took photos of the credit card statements showing suspicious charges. I screenshotted some of the messages between Daniel and Vanessa before he started deleting them. I made copies of our financial documents, our mortgage papers, everything I thought I might need if things went south. It felt calculating and cold, but it also felt necessary. If he could plan secret weekends with his mistress, I could plan for my own future. The hardest part was maintaining the facade with the kids. Maya was getting to that age where she picked up on tension, asked uncomfortable questions. One night at dinner, she asked why Daddy and I never hugged anymore. The question came out of nowhere, just dropped into the middle of a conversation about her school day. And it hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't even realized we'd stopped touching, stopped showing affection, but of course we had. How could we not when everything between us was poisoned? I told Maya that grown-ups get busy and stressed sometimes, but we still loved each other. Another lie. Jake, only 6, accepted it without question. But Maya looked at me with these knowing eyes, too old for her 9 years, and I could tell she didn't quite believe me. That night, I cried in the shower, muffling the sound with a towel, mourning the innocence my children were losing because their father couldn't keep his vows. I started having imaginary conversations with Daniel in my head. Elaborate confrontations where I laid out everything I knew, watched him squirm, delivered perfect cutting lines that left him speechless. In these fantasies, I was powerful, articulate, devastating. In reality, I could barely string together a coherent sentence when he was around. The weight of the secrets I was carrying made normal conversation nearly impossible. There were moments I almost broke. One evening, Daniel came home early and suggested we have a date night, just the 2 of us. He'd arranged for his mother to watch the kids, made reservations at the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. The old me would have been thrilled, seen it as a sign that he was trying to reconnect. The new me knew it was probably guilt, or worse, excitement from his affair spilling over into wanting to seem like a good husband. I went to the dinner because saying no would have raised questions. We sat across from each other at that familiar restaurant, and he held my hand across the table, told me I looked beautiful, said we should do this more often, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my wine in his face, announce to the entire restaurant what kind of man he really was. Instead, I smiled and agreed that yes, we should do this more often. I ate pasta I couldn't taste and listened to him talk about work, carefully editing out any mention of Vanessa, and I played my part perfectly. On the drive home, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. He said, "I love you, Rebecca. I know I've been distracted with work lately, but you're still my everything." The words should have meant something. Instead, they felt like ashes in my mouth. I said, "I love you too," because what else could I say? I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet, wasn't ready to detonate the bomb that would destroy our family. So I swallowed the truth and let the lies continue. That night, he wanted to be intimate. It had been weeks, maybe months since we'd been together. I went through the motions, let him touch me with the same hands that had been touching Vanessa. I stared at the ceiling the entire time, feeling nothing but disgust and sadness and a desperate wish to be anywhere else. Afterwards, he held me and fell asleep quickly, contentedly. I lay there in his arms, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. The next morning, I woke up and decided I needed help. Real help. Not just venting to my sister or crying in the shower. I needed to talk to someone who could help me make sense of what I was feeling, what I was becoming. That's when I started looking for therapists. My daughter Maya noticed something was wrong. She was only 9, but kids are perceptive. One afternoon, she found me crying in the laundry room, trying to muffle the sound so no one would hear. She climbed into my lap, way too big for it really, and hugged me tight. Maya asked, "Mommy, why are you so sad?" I didn't know how to explain it to her. How do you tell your child that sometimes the people you love most can hurt you in ways you never imagined? That sometimes you hurt yourself by trying to hurt them back? I just held her and told her that grown-ups have complicated feelings sometimes, and that I'd be okay. But would I be okay? I wasn't sure anymore. The revenge had been a distraction, a way to feel powerful when I was actually at my most powerless. Now I had to face the real questions. What did I want? Not what I should want. Not what was expected of me, but what I actually wanted for my life going forward. I made an appointment with a therapist. Not couples therapy, just therapy for me. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't my sister, my friends, or my children. Someone who could help me untangle the mess I'd become. Her name was Dr. Patricia Chen, and she had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that I found comforting. In our first session, I told her everything. The affair, the revenge, the guilt, the confusion about what to do next. She listened without judgment, taking notes occasionally, nodding at the right moments. When I finished, she asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. Dr. Chen said, "Rebecca, who are you without being Daniel's wife?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea. I'd been with Daniel since I was 21. I'd gone from being my parents' daughter to being Daniel's wife to being Maya and Jake's mom. I'd never been just Rebecca, whoever that was. Every identity I had was tied to someone else, defined by my relationship to them. The thought terrified me. We started meeting twice a week. Dr. Chen had a waiting room with comfortable chairs and magazines I never read because I was always too anxious, rehearsing what I'd say in my head. Her office smelled like lavender, and there was a white noise machine outside the door that made me feel like whatever I said stayed contained in that small, safe space. In our third session, Dr. Chen asked me to talk about my life before Daniel. What had I wanted? What had I dreamed about? I had to dig deep to remember. I'd been an English major in college, loved Victorian literature, thought maybe I'd teach someday. But then I got pregnant with Maya right after graduation, and those plans evaporated. I'd told myself I'd go back to school later, but later never came. There was always something more immediate, more pressing. Diapers and daycare and Daniel's career and making sure everyone else's needs were met. Dr. Chen asked, "Do you resent Daniel for that?" The question made me defensive at first. No, of course not. Those were my choices. I chose to stay home, to prioritize the family. But then she pushed gently, asked if they'd really been choices or if they'd been expectations I'd internalized so deeply I couldn't tell the difference anymore. That session left me unsettled, questioning things I'd thought were settled long ago. I started journaling between sessions, something Dr. Chen had suggested. At first, I wrote about the affair, pages and pages of anger and hurt. But gradually, I started writing about other things. Memories from before Daniel, dreams I'd had, parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I remembered loving to paint when I was younger, spending entire weekends at my easel. When had I stopped? I couldn't even remember. The paints had been packed away when we moved into our current house, stored in the garage, buried under years of accumulated family stuff. In one session, I told Dr. Chen about the purple dye incident. I'd been holding it in, afraid she'd judge me, tell me I was a terrible person. Instead, she asked me what I'd felt in that moment when I was in Vanessa's apartment. I thought about it carefully. I said, powerful. Like I was taking something back even though I wasn't really. Like I mattered. Like my feelings mattered enough to act on them. Dr. Chen nodded. She said, and how do you feel about it now? I told her the truth. Ashamed. Not because of what I did to Vanessa, but because it didn't change anything. It was just a distraction from the real problem, which was that my marriage was over and I didn't know who I was without it. We spent several sessions working through that shame. Dr. Chen helped me see that the revenge wasn't really about Vanessa at all. It was about me feeling powerless and trying to reclaim some sense of control in the only way I could think of in that moment. It didn't make it right, but it made it understandable. Human. She helped me see that I could acknowledge what I'd done, learn from it, and move forward without letting it define me. One breakthrough came about 6 weeks into therapy. Dr. Chen asked me to describe my perfect day, with no limitations, no responsibilities to anyone else. Just what would make me happy. I struggled with it. Every scenario I came up with included making breakfast for the kids or planning something Daniel would enjoy. She stopped me. Dr. Chen said, "Just you, Rebecca. What do you want?" The question made me cry. I realized I didn't know. I'd spent so long defining myself through other people's needs that I'd completely lost touch with my own wants. We spent the rest of that session just sitting with that realization, and it was one of the hardest hours of my life. But slowly, session by session, I started to figure it out. I wanted to read for pleasure again, not just help with homework. I wanted to travel, see places I'd only read about in books. I wanted to finish my degree, maybe even teach someday like I'd once planned. I wanted friendships that were about more than coordinating kids' playdates. I wanted to matter, not just as someone's wife or mother, but as myself. Dr. Chen also helped me work through the practical realities I was facing. I couldn't keep living in this state of knowing about the affair but not addressing it. It was eating me alive, affecting my health, my relationship with my kids, my sense of self. We talked about confrontation, about what I wanted the outcome to be, about how to protect myself and the children no matter what happened. She asked me in one session if I wanted to save my marriage. I'd been so focused on the betrayal that I hadn't really considered that question. Did I want to work things out with Daniel? Could I ever trust him again? Could I forgive him? The answer, I realized, was no. Even if he ended the affair, even if he begged for forgiveness, something fundamental had broken that I didn't think could be repaired. The issue wasn't just that he'd cheated. It was that he'd looked me in the eye every day and lied, had held my hand at dinner and lied, had made love to me and lied. That level of sustained deception wasn't something I could get past. Once I admitted that to myself, everything became clearer. I didn't need to save my marriage. I needed to end it. The thought was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I started preparing in therapy for the confrontation I knew was coming. Dr. Chen and I role-played different scenarios, helping me find my voice, practice saying the hard things I needed to say. Around this same time, I also started making practical preparations. I researched divorce lawyers, called a few for initial consultations. I opened that separate bank account and started building up my own funds. I looked into apartment rentals in decent school districts, started figuring out what my life might look like post-divorce. Each small step felt both empowering and heartbreaking. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chen helped me start answering that question. We talked about my interests, my dreams, the things I'd wanted to do before marriage and motherhood consumed my life. I'd wanted to be a teacher once. I loved literature, loved the idea of shaping young minds. But I'd put all that on hold when I got pregnant with Maya, and somehow the hold had become permanent. Dr. Chen suggested I start doing things just for myself, small things at first. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking morning walks before the kids woke up, just me and my thoughts and the sunrise. I enrolled in an online course about children's literature. Tiny acts of reclamation, taking back pieces of myself that I'd given away without even realizing it. The book club met every other Tuesday evening at the library. The first time I went, I almost turned around and went home. It felt selfish, leaving Daniel to handle bedtime routine so I could go discuss novels with strangers. But I forced myself to walk through those library doors, and I'm glad I did. The group was small, mostly women around my age, and they were discussing a novel by Toni Morrison. I'd read it in college, but experienced it completely differently now. As a woman who understood betrayal and identity and the cost of love in ways my younger self couldn't have imagined. One woman in the group, Linda, shared that she'd just gone through a divorce. She talked about how reading had saved her during that dark time, given her an escape and a way to process her feelings. After the meeting, she pulled me aside and gave me her number, said I looked like someone who could use a friend. I didn't tell her my situation, but somehow she knew. That's how I started building a support network outside of my marriage, outside of the identity I'd built around being Daniel's wife. The morning walks became sacred to me. I'd wake up at 5:30, before Daniel's alarm went off, slip into my running shoes, and head out into the quiet neighborhood. At first, I just walked, my mind spinning with anxiety and plans and fear. But gradually, as weeks passed, I started noticing things. The way the sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. The sound of birds waking up. The elderly man 3 streets over who was always watering his garden at dawn. These small observations grounded me, reminded me that life was happening all around me, that there was more to existence than the drama consuming my home life. During one of these walks, I ran into Mrs. Patterson, an older woman who lived on our street. I'd waved to her for years but never really talked to her. That morning, she was sitting on her porch with coffee, and she called out a greeting. I stopped to chat, and somehow ended up telling her about my interest in teaching, how I'd always wanted to finish my degree. She told me her own story about going back to school at 50 to become a nurse, how it had been the best decision of her life. She said something that stuck with me. Mrs. Patterson said, "Honey, it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Don't let fear or other people's expectations keep you from your own life." I thought about her words constantly. Other people's expectations had defined my entire adult life. My parents' expectations that I'd settle down and start a family. Daniel's expectations that I'd be the perfect wife, managing the home while he focused on his career. Society's expectations about what a good mother looks like, always sacrificing, always putting everyone else first. When had I ever stopped to ask what I expected from myself? The online course in children's literature was challenging but exhilarating. I'd forgotten how much I loved analyzing texts, discussing themes and symbolism, thinking deeply about stories. The professor, Dr. Matthews, provided detailed feedback on my essays, and I found myself looking forward to each assignment. One paper I wrote about identity and belonging in young adult literature earned high praise. Dr. Matthews wrote in her comments that I had a natural gift for literary analysis and suggested I consider pursuing my teaching credentials. That small piece of encouragement meant more than she could have known. But while I was slowly building this new version of myself, I was still living a lie at home. Daniel had no idea I knew about the affair, no clue that I was planning to leave. We coexisted in our house like polite roommates, going through the motions of marriage while the foundation crumbled beneath us. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with a puzzled expression, like he couldn't quite figure out why I seemed different, but couldn't pinpoint what had changed. The stress was affecting me physically. I lost weight without trying, stopped sleeping well, developed a nervous habit of picking at my cuticles until they bled. My friend Jessica noticed when we met for coffee one afternoon. She reached across the table and took my hand, stilling my fidgeting fingers. Jessica said, "Rebecca, I'm worried about you. You're not yourself. Please talk to me. What's really going on?" I almost told her everything right then, but I couldn't. Saying it out loud would make it real, would start the dominoes falling, and I wasn't quite ready. So I gave her another vague answer about stress and being tired. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. I could see the concern in her eyes, though, and I knew I couldn't keep this facade up much longer. Things came to a head sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning, and Daniel was supposed to take Jake to soccer practice. At the last minute, he got a call. He stepped outside to take it, but I could hear him through the window. His voice was soft, affectionate, the voice he used to use with me. When he came back in, he said something had come up at work and he needed to go into the office for a few hours. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I'd loved for 15 years, the father of my children, lying to my face without a hint of remorse. And something inside me just broke. Not in a dramatic way, not with tears or shouting, more like a quiet snap, like a wire that had been pulled too tight finally giving way. I said, "There is no work emergency. You're going to see Vanessa." The color drained from his face. He started to deny it, stumbling over his words, but I cut him off. I continued, "I know about Vanessa. I've known for weeks. I saw you with her at your office. I read your messages. I know about the fake Chicago conference. I know everything, Daniel." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake had gone upstairs, thankfully, so he didn't have to witness this. Daniel just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, clearly trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, he said the most pathetic thing imaginable. Daniel said, "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. It's not what I think? What did he imagine I thought? That they were having philosophical discussions about quarterly reports? I said, "Don't insult my intelligence. You've been having an affair. Just admit it." He collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. The mask of the confident, successful businessman crumbled away, leaving someone who looked small and pathetic. He admitted it. All of it. The affair had been going on for 8 months. They'd met at a work conference, hit it off, started messaging. It was supposed to be just a fling, but it became more. He said he never meant to hurt me. He said he loved me but was confused. He said all the things cheaters say when they get caught, the same tired script that's been used a million times. I listened to all of it without interrupting, feeling strangely detached. This man who I'd built my entire adult life around, who I'd trusted completely, had betrayed me in the deepest way possible. And now he wanted sympathy for being confused? Understanding for his moment of weakness that had lasted 8 months? When he finished his explanations and excuses, I asked him one question. "Do you love her?" He hesitated, which was answer enough. But then he said, "I don't know. Maybe. But I love you too. I love our family. I don't want to lose everything we've built." That was the moment I realized it was over. Not because he might love Vanessa, but because he was thinking about what he would lose. Not about what he'd done to me, not about the pain he'd caused, but about his own potential losses. Our marriage, our family, it was all just an asset he didn't want to give up. I told him to leave, pack a bag, and stay somewhere else for a while. We'd figure out the details later, but I needed him out of my house, out of my space. He protested at first, worried about what the neighbors would think, about explaining it to the kids. Always worried about appearances, about maintaining the illusion of the perfect family. But I was done with illusions. Daniel said, "Rebecca, please. Let's talk about this. Let's work on it. We can go to counseling, fix this." I shook my head. "There's nothing to fix, Daniel. You broke this. You chose to break this. And now you have to live with that choice. I need you to leave." He left that afternoon, and I told the kids that Daddy was staying at a hotel for work. They accepted it without question, the way kids do. I knew I'd have to tell them the truth eventually, but not yet. Not until I'd figured out my own truth first. The house felt different without him. Emptier, but also lighter somehow. Like a weight I'd been carrying had been lifted. I spent that first night alone sitting in our bedroom, the room we'd shared for 10 years, looking at wedding photos on the dresser. We looked so young, so happy, so convinced we'd beat the odds. I thought about the woman in those photos, the girl who'd believed in fairy tales and forever. She felt like a stranger now. Over the next few weeks, I started building a new life from the ruins of the old one. I talked to a lawyer about divorce proceedings. I told my parents and close friends the truth about what had happened. The outpouring of support surprised me. People I'd considered casual acquaintances showed up with meals, offered to watch the kids, listened to me vent for hours. My sister flew out from Seattle and stayed for a week, helping me make plans, reminding me that I was strong enough to do this. Emma said one night, over a bottle of wine we'd opened after the kids went to bed, "You know what's amazing? You're not falling apart. The old Rebecca would have fallen apart." I thought about that. She was right. The old Rebecca, the one who'd existed 3 months ago, would have been devastated beyond function. But I wasn't her anymore. The betrayal had changed me, but so had standing up for myself, making hard choices, facing uncomfortable truths. I was becoming someone new, someone I didn't fully know yet, but someone I was starting to respect. The kids were the hardest part. Maya started having nightmares. Jake became clingy and anxious. They knew something was wrong even if they didn't understand the details. One evening, I sat them both down and explained, in age-appropriate terms, that Daddy and I were having some grown-up problems and might not stay married. Maya cried. Jake asked if it was his fault. Breaking their hearts while mine was also shattered was the hardest thing I've ever done. I said, "None of this is your fault. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes people grow apart. But Daddy and I both love you so much, and that will never change, no matter what happens with our marriage." They had questions I didn't have answers to yet. Where would they live? Would they have to change schools? Would Daddy still come to Jake's games? I promised them we'd figure it all out together, that their happiness was the most important thing. I meant it too. Even in the midst of my own pain, protecting them was still my priority. Daniel wanted to meet and talk. He'd been staying with a friend, giving me space, but now he wanted to discuss the future. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us usually went to. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping. Part of me felt satisfaction at that. Part of me felt sad that it had come to this. He apologized, really apologized, not the half-hearted sorry I'd gotten before. He said he'd been selfish, that he'd been going through some kind of midlife crisis and handled it in the worst possible way. He said he'd ended things with Vanessa, that he wanted to work on our marriage, that he'd do anything to fix what he'd broken. I listened to all of it, sipping my coffee, watching this man I'd known so well become someone I barely recognized. When he finished, I asked him something I'd been wondering. I said, "If I hadn't found out, would you have ever told me? Would you have just kept lying, kept seeing her, kept playing happy family at home?" He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Daniel finally said, "I don't know. Probably not. I didn't want to hurt you." That was the problem, wasn't it? He didn't want to hurt me, but he did it anyway. He wanted to have everything, the stability and respect of marriage, the excitement of an affair, and never face consequences. Well, consequences had arrived. I told him I wanted a divorce, not out of spite or revenge, but because I didn't trust him anymore, and I couldn't be married to someone I didn't trust. He started crying, which was jarring. Daniel never cried. He begged me to reconsider, to give him another chance, to think about the kids. But I had been thinking about the kids. I'd been thinking about what kind of example I wanted to set for Maya, about what women should accept in relationships. I'd been thinking about what I wanted Jake to learn about respect and honesty, and how you treat people you love. I said, "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I deserve better. Our kids deserve better. They deserve to grow up seeing healthy relationships, even if that means their parents aren't together anymore." The divorce process was ugly in all the typical ways: fighting over assets, negotiating custody arrangements, dealing with lawyers and paperwork, and the dismantling of a decade of shared life. But through it all, I kept moving forward. I enrolled in a teaching certification program at the community college. I started building a life that was mine, not ours, not defined by being someone's wife. The purple hair incident never came up in the divorce proceedings. Vanessa never figured out what had happened, apparently attributing it to a bad batch of shampoo or sabotage from a jealous coworker. I never told anyone what I'd done, carrying that secret like a dark little stone in my pocket. It was my reminder that pain can turn you into someone you don't want to be if you let it, that revenge might feel good in the moment, but doesn't actually heal anything. About 6 months into the separation, I ran into Vanessa at a grocery store. She didn't recognize me. Why would she? But I recognized her immediately. Her hair was back to auburn, though shorter now, probably chopped off to get rid of the last remnants of purple. She looked tired, normal, not like the homewrecker I'd built up in my mind. Just a woman buying groceries, probably dealing with her own complicated feelings about being involved with a married man. I almost said something to her, almost walked up and introduced myself, told her who I was, watched her face when she realized. But what would be the point? She hadn't forced Daniel to cheat. She was just the person he'd chosen to cheat with. The real betrayal was his, and I'd already addressed that. She was just a supporting character in my story, not the villain. Instead, I walked past her with my head held high, my cart full of groceries for the new apartment I'd rented. It was smaller than the house, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The kids had their own rooms. We'd painted the walls bright colors they picked out, and it was starting to feel like home. My home, not our home, just mine. The teaching program was harder than I expected. I was older than most of my classmates, out of practice with studying, juggling coursework with parenting and divorce proceedings. There were nights I wanted to quit, moments I questioned whether I could actually do this. But I pushed through, driven by the knowledge that this was my chance to build something that belonged only to me. My student teaching placement was at an elementary school in a low-income neighborhood. The kids were challenging, dealing with trauma and poverty in broken homes. I saw myself in some of them, the ones who were trying so hard to be good, to do everything right, to keep their families together through sheer force of will. I wanted to tell them it wasn't their job, that they were just kids and deserved to be kids. Instead, I tried to make my classroom a safe space, somewhere they could learn and grow without carrying the weight of adult problems. One of my students, a girl named Mia, reminded me so much of Maya. Same age, same dark curly hair, same serious expression. She was struggling with reading, falling behind her classmates, getting frustrated and acting out. I started working with her one-on-one after school, and slowly she started making progress. The day she read an entire chapter book by herself, her face lit up with such pure joy that I nearly cried. This was why I was doing this, not for revenge or validation, or to prove something to Daniel. For moments like this, where I could make a real difference. I graduated from the teaching program on a sunny May afternoon. My kids were there, cheering embarrassingly loud. My parents and sister came too, proud and supportive. Daniel wasn't there, which was fine. This accomplishment was mine alone. As I walked across the stage to receive my certificate, I thought about how far I'd come from that broken woman holding a sandwich outside her husband's office building, watching her world crumble. The job offers came quickly. Apparently, there's a shortage of qualified teachers willing to work in challenging schools. I accepted a position at the same school where I'd done my student teaching. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't need great. I needed purpose, meaning, something that was mine. My first year of teaching was brutal. The learning curve was steep, the emotional demands intense. But I loved it. I loved connecting with my students, seeing them grow, being part of their lives in a meaningful way. I was good at it too. By the end of the year, my classroom had some of the highest reading scores in the school. More importantly, my students felt safe and valued, maybe for the first time in their academic careers. The job was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd come home after a full day of teaching, lesson planning, grading, and meetings, only to immediately shift into mom mode. Making dinner, helping with homework, managing bedtime routines, all while trying to keep my own emotions in check. There were nights I collapsed into bed at 9 o'clock, too tired to even shower, only to wake up and do it all over again. My classroom became a refuge, though. I decorated it with colorful posters about kindness and growth mindsets, created a cozy reading corner with beanbags and soft lighting, filled the shelves with books that represented all kinds of kids and families. I wanted my students to see themselves in the stories they read, to know that their experiences mattered and were valid. One student in particular reminded me why this work was so important. Her name was Destiny, a quiet third grader who came to school in clothes that were too small, with a lunch that was often just crackers and juice. She struggled with reading, which made her withdraw even more, afraid of being called on in class. I started working with her during lunch periods, just the two of us, slowly building her confidence along with her skills. One day, about 3 months into the school year, Destiny read an entire picture book out loud to me without a single mistake. When she finished, she looked up with tears in her eyes. Destiny said, "Miss Rebecca, I did it. I really did it." I hugged her and told her how proud I was, and I meant it. This was why I'd become a teacher. Not for the money or the status or any external validation, but for these moments where you could see a child's entire world expanding, their sense of possibility growing. Whatever pain I was going through in my personal life, these kids made it worthwhile. But the personal pain was still there, woven through everything. The first major holiday after the separation was Thanksgiving. We had to figure out custody arrangements, decide who got the kids for which meal, navigate the awkwardness of explaining to extended family why we weren't all together. I hosted Thanksgiving dinner at my new apartment, just me and the kids and my parents. My mother kept asking if I was eating enough, worry etched into every line of her face. My father barely spoke, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Maya helped me cook the turkey, following my grandmother's old recipe. She was so careful, so serious about getting everything right, trying to make the day feel normal even though nothing was normal anymore. Jake made place cards for the table, drawing little turkeys in crayon. We said grace before eating, and I found myself genuinely grateful despite everything. Grateful for my children, my parents, my new job, the strength I'd found to leave a situation that was slowly killing me. Christmas was harder. The kids were with Daniel for Christmas Eve, their first major holiday apart from me. I spent the evening at Linda's house from book club. She'd invited several of us over, all women who were divorced or separated or single for various reasons. We drank wine, exchanged small gifts, told stories about our worst holiday memories. There was something comforting about being with people who understood that the holidays weren't always magical, that sometimes they highlighted everything you'd lost rather than everything you had. But when I got home that night to my empty apartment, I cried. I cried for the family traditions that were broken, for the kids who had to split their holidays between two homes, for the version of myself who'd believed in forever. I let myself grieve, really grieve, for the first time since the separation. Doctor Chen had told me I needed to do this, to stop being strong all the time and actually feel the loss. So I sat on my couch with a box of tissues and let the sadness wash over me until I'd cried myself empty. The next morning, Christmas Day, I picked up Maya and Jake early. We opened presents in our new living room, the tree we'd decorated together looking a bit sparse but ours. The kids were excited about their gifts, and we spent the day in pajamas watching movies and eating too much candy. It wasn't the Christmas I'd imagined a year ago, but it was good. It was real. It was ours. As winter turned to spring, I started to find my rhythm. The teaching became more natural, less overwhelming. I developed routines with the kids that felt sustainable. Maya joined the soccer team, and I became one of those parents cheering loudly from the sidelines. Jake started taking art classes, discovering a talent for painting that reminded me of my own forgotten artistic interests. We were building a life, different from what I'd planned but somehow right. Dating felt strange and scary when I finally attempted it. Linda convinced me to try one of those dating apps, helped me create a profile and pick photos. My first few dates were disasters. One guy talked about his ex-wife for 2 hours straight. Another spent the entire dinner on his phone. I started to think maybe I just wasn't ready, that I should focus on myself and the kids and forget about romance. Then I matched with Marcus. His profile was straightforward, honest. He was a high school guidance counselor, divorced 3 years, had 2 teenage daughters. His messages were thoughtful, funny, without trying too hard. We talked for 2 weeks before actually meeting in person, building a foundation of conversation first. Our first date was coffee on a Saturday afternoon. I was so nervous I almost canceled 3 times. But I forced myself to go, and I'm glad I did. Marcus was kind, with an easy smile and a way of listening that made you feel heard. We talked about our jobs, our kids, the challenges of starting over after divorce. There was no pretense, no game playing, just 2 people being honest about where they were in life. We saw each other casually for a few months before introducing him to my kids. I was careful about this. Didn't want them to get attached to someone who might not stick around. Dr. Chen and I spent several sessions discussing the right timing, how to navigate dating as a single parent. When I finally introduced Marcus to Maya and Jake, it was low-key. We all went to a children's museum together, and he let them lead, asking questions about their interests, treating them like people rather than obstacles to dating their mother. Jake liked him immediately because Marcus knew everything about dinosaurs, which was Jake's current obsession. Maya was more reserved, testing him with difficult questions and careful observation. But gradually she warmed up to him too. I appreciated that Marcus never tried to be their father, never overstepped. He was just another adult in their lives who cared about them, and that felt like the right balance. Meanwhile, Daniel had moved on too, though not with Vanessa. Apparently their relationship had fizzled out once the secrecy and excitement wore off. He was dating someone new, a woman named Christine who worked in finance. The kids mentioned her occasionally, and I found I didn't feel jealous or angry. Mostly, I felt relieved that he was moving on too, that we could both build new lives without the weight of our failed marriage dragging us down. The summer after my first year of teaching, I took the kids on a road trip. Just the three of us, driving up the coast, staying in budget motels, exploring beaches and small towns. We played road trip games, sang along to playlists we'd made together, and ate at diners with sticky menus and friendly waitresses. One evening, sitting on a beach watching the sunset, Maya leaned against my shoulder. Maya said, "Mom, I know things have been hard, but I think we're going to be okay. We're different now, but we're okay." I kissed the top of her head, tears threatening. She was right. We were different, but we were okay. More than okay, actually. We were genuine. We were building something real, something that belonged to us, without the foundation of lies and betrayal that had poisoned our old life. That road trip marked a turning point for me. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually living, engaging with life in ways I hadn't in years. The fear that had dominated those first months after discovery and separation had transformed into something else. Not fearlessness exactly, but confidence. The knowledge that I'd faced one of the hardest things imaginable and come through it. Not unscathed, but stronger. My second year of teaching started with renewed energy. I took on additional responsibilities, mentoring a new teacher, helping to redesign our reading curriculum. The principal recognized my work and talked about potential advancement opportunities. I was building a career, not just holding down a job. It felt significant, meaningful in ways that volunteering and part-time work never had. Daniel and I settled into a co-parenting routine. It was awkward at first, full of tension and unspoken resentment. But gradually, for the sake of the kids, we learned to communicate civilly. He had them every other weekend and one evening during the week. Sometimes I missed them so much during his weekends that the apartment felt unbearably empty. Other times, I relished the freedom. The ability to do whatever I wanted without considering anyone else's needs. On one of those kid-free weekends, Jessica convinced me to go out with her and some other friends. We went to a wine bar downtown, the kind of place I never would have gone when I was married. Sophisticated, dimly lit, full of young professionals and divorced women rediscovering themselves. We drank too much wine, laughed too loud, and I felt light in a way I hadn't in years. A man approached our table at one point. Attractive, well-dressed, confident. He asked if he could buy me a drink. A year ago, I would have blushed and stammered and made some excuse about being married. Instead, I smiled and said yes. We talked for an hour about nothing important, just easy conversation and light flirting. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him. We went on a few dates after that. Nothing serious developed, but it was nice to feel wanted again, to remember that I was more than just a discarded wife and overwhelmed mother. But mostly, I focused on myself and my kids and my career. I started running in the mornings, something I'd never done before. I joined a book club and actually read the books this time instead of just skimming summaries. I took Maya and Jake on a road trip over summer break, just the three of us, making memories that didn't include Daniel. We went to national parks, stayed in cheap motels, ate too much junk food, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. Maya said it was the best vacation ever, which made me feel proud and sad in equal measure. The first anniversary of discovering Daniel's affair came and went. I'd been dreading it, expecting to spiral into depression and regret. Instead, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that I'd found out, that I'd had the strength to leave, that I'd rebuilt my life into something better. Was I happier than I'd been in my marriage? In some ways, yes, in others, no. My life was harder now, more financially precarious, lonelier in some moments. But it was authentic. It was real. It was mine. I ran into Daniel one afternoon at Jake's school play. We sat together, politely distant, watching our son perform. He tried to make small talk during intermission, asking about my teaching job, commenting on how good I looked. I answered his questions briefly, not unkindly, but not warmly either. He was part of my past, connected to me only through our children, and I was okay with that. After the play, as we were leaving, he stopped me with a hand on my arm. He said he wanted to tell me something. My stomach clenched, worried he was going to say he was getting remarried or moving away, or something that would disrupt the fragile balance we'd achieved. Instead, he apologized. Really, truly apologized, not trying to justify or explain, just acknowledging the pain he'd caused and taking full responsibility for his choices. Daniel said, "I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too selfish and stupid to appreciate what I had. I'm sorry, Rebecca, for all of it. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." I looked at him, this man I'd loved so fiercely, and felt nothing but a distant sort of pity. He looked older, worn down, like the weight of his choices had aged him years and months. I wondered if he was happy with Vanessa, if they'd stayed together, or if the affair had fizzled out once it wasn't forbidden anymore. I didn't ask. It didn't matter. I said, "Thank you for saying that. I think I needed to hear it. But what matters now is that we both move forward and be the best parents we can be for Maya and Jake. That's all that matters." He nodded, looking relieved that I hadn't yelled or cried or made a scene. We parted ways in the parking lot, him to his car, me to mine, two separate people living separate lives, bound together only by the children we'd created. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. The discovery, the anger, the revenge, the divorce, the rebuilding. I thought about the woman I'd been, desperate to be perfect, to hold her marriage together through sheer force of will. I thought about the woman I was becoming, flawed and messy, but genuine. If I could go back, would I do things differently? Would I skip the purple dye incident? Take some kind of moral high road? Honestly, I'm not sure. That moment of revenge was a turning point for me. Not because it felt good, but because it showed me who I didn't want to be. It was the wake-up call I needed to stop reacting and start acting, to stop being a victim of my circumstances, and start being the author of my own story. It was petty and wrong, but it was also mine. My choice, my action, my consequence to live with. I'm not proud of what I did to Vanessa. Breaking into her home, sabotaging her shampoo, it was vindictive and illegal and beneath the person I want to be. But I'm also not drowning in guilt anymore. It happened. I did it. I learned from it. And then I moved on to become someone better. The truth is, betrayal changes you. It breaks something fundamental in how you see the world and your place in it. You can let that breaking destroy you, turn you bitter and vengeful and small. Or you can use it as an opportunity to rebuild yourself into something stronger, more authentic, more aligned with who you really are beneath all the roles and expectations. I chose the latter, though it took me stumbling through some darkness first. My second year of teaching started with more confidence. I knew what I was doing now, had systems in place, relationships built with students and parents. I started a reading club after school, teaching kids who were behind to fall in love with books the way I had as a child. The principal noticed my work and asked me to mentor new teachers, which felt like validation I hadn't realized I needed. Maya and Jake were adjusting to the new normal. They still had hard days, moments when they missed having both parents under one roof. But they were resilient, adapting to 2 homes, 2 bedrooms, 2 sets of routines. And they were learning important lessons about honesty, respect, and what healthy relationships should look like. I hoped that when they grew up, they'd understand why I made the choices I did, why staying in a broken marriage wouldn't have served anyone. I started dating more seriously about 18 months after the divorce was finalized. His name was Marcus, a guidance counselor at a nearby high school. He was kind, stable, divorced himself with 2 teenagers. We understood each other's complicated lives, the challenges of co-parenting and rebuilding after betrayal. It was different from the intense, all-consuming love I'd had with Daniel. Calmer, more mature, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than passion and promises. Marcus never asked about my ex-husband, never pushed me to share more than I was comfortable with. He met my kids slowly, carefully, making sure they were ready. He didn't try to be their father, just another adult in their lives who cared about them. Maya liked him because he was funny. Jake liked him because he knew everything about baseball. I liked him because he saw me as I was now, not as who I'd been or who I was trying to be. One evening, about a year into our relationship, Marcus and I were having dinner at my apartment. The kids were at Daniel's for the weekend. We were cooking together, drinking wine, laughing about some ridiculous story from his day. And I realized I was happy, not the desperate, clinging to perfection happiness I'd chased in my marriage. Real happiness, the kind that comes from being comfortable in your own skin, surrounded by people who genuinely know and like you. Marcus noticed me getting quiet and asked what I was thinking about. I almost brushed it off with some joke, but then I decided to be honest. I told him about the purple dye incident. I'd never told anyone except my therapist, carrying it as my shameful secret. But I needed him to know, needed to see if he'd look at me differently. judge me for my moment of vindictive weakness. I said, I'm not proud of it. It was petty and wrong and could have had serious consequences. But it was also the moment I stopped being passive, stopped just letting life happen to me. Does that make sense? He was quiet for a minute, considering. Then he said something that surprised me. Marcus said, I get it. When my ex-wife cheated, I wanted revenge too. I fantasized about all kinds of ways to hurt her back. I never acted on any of it, but the desire was there. The difference is, you did something, realized it didn't actually help, and then moved forward to build something better. That takes strength, not weakness. We didn't talk about it again after that. It was just another piece of my history, acknowledged and accepted and moved past. That's what healthy relationships do, I was learning. They make space for your past mistakes without defining you by them. Time kept moving forward. Maya grew into a teenager, moody and brilliant and challenging in all the ways teenagers are. Jake discovered he loved art, filling our apartment with his drawings and paintings. I got promoted to lead teacher, mentoring others and helping shape curriculum. Daniel remarried, not to Vanessa, but to someone else, a woman closer to his age who seemed kind when I met her briefly at a school event. I hoped he'd learned something, become someone better, though that wasn't my concern anymore. On the 5-year anniversary of my divorce being finalized, I took myself out to dinner. Just me, alone, at a nice restaurant I'd always wanted to try. I dressed up, ordered the expensive wine, and toasted to myself. To surviving, to rebuilding, to becoming someone I was genuinely proud to be. The woman who broke into an apartment to ruin someone's hair was still part of my history, but she wasn't who I was anymore. She was just one chapter in a much longer, much more interesting story. Looking back now, I can see the journey clearly. The comfortable life I'd thought was everything, the devastating betrayal, the moment of vengeful action, the decision to rebuild rather than simply react. Every step was necessary, even the ugly ones. They taught me that I was stronger than I knew, more capable than I'd given myself credit for, worthy of better than what I'd been accepting. Would I recommend revenge to others going through similar situations? No. It doesn't actually heal anything, and it risks turning you into someone you don't want to be. But do I regret my specific path, mistakes and all? Also, no. Because every choice, every mistake, every moment of growth led me here, to a life I actually love, to a version of myself I'm proud to be. The kids are doing well, I'm doing well, and somewhere out there, a woman named Vanessa probably still wonders what the hell happened to her shampoo that day. That's a mystery she'll never solve, and I'm okay with that. Some secrets are meant to be kept, small reminders of who we were and how far we've come. My name is Rebecca, and this is my story. Not the story of a perfect woman, or a victim, or a villain. Just the story of someone who got knocked down, made some questionable choices, and then found the strength to build something better from the ruins. I'm a mother, a teacher, a friend, a partner, and most importantly, I'm myself. Fully, authentically, unapologetically myself. And that, more than any revenge or validation or perfect ending, is what I'd been searching for all along.